grand halls of Ashbourne Manor, a bride lies dead on her wedding day, locked in a sealed chamber, her veil torn, a poisoned glass at her side. Hercule Poirot unravels a web of love and betrayal, where a jealous rival, a hidden key, and a fatal sip of champagne conceal a chilling truth. Who turned joy to tragedy? The answer lies in the shadows of envy. Time is running out to catch a killer. Chapter 1. The Sealed Chamber. The morning sun cast golden beams through the leaded windows of Ashbourne Hall, a stately manor nestled in the verdant folds of Gloucestershire's St. Aldwyn's village. The air hummed with the excitement of a wedding day, and the scent of roses, meticulously arranged in silver vases, mingled with the crisp anticipation of the gathered guests. Laughter and the clink of champagne flutes echoed from the drawing room, where the cream of local society mingled in their silks and mourning coats, their voices a soft murmur of expectation for the union of Miss Eleanor Cresswell and Mr. Julian Warrender. Hercule Poirot, the diminutive Belgian detective with his impeccable mustache and polished patent leather shoes, stood slightly apart, a glass of tisane in hand. His presence was a courtesy to Sir Reginald Cresswell, the bride's uncle, who had invited him to the festivities. Poirot's sharp, bird-like eyes surveyed the room, noting the flushed cheeks of the young ladies, the stiff collars of the gentlemen, and the subtle undercurrents of tension beneath the gaiety. "A wedding," he remarked to Captain Hastings, his steadfast companion, "is a stage for human passions, n'est-ce pas? Joy, envy, perhaps even despair." Hastings, ever the Englishman, adjusted his tie and chuckled. "You see mysteries everywhere, Poirot. It's just a wedding." "Précisément, mon ami," Poirot replied, his eyes glinting. "And where there are hearts, there are secrets." The clock struck 11, and the guests began to move toward the garden, where the ceremony was to take place under a floral arch. But the festive air shattered with a scream that cut through the manor like a blade. It came from the upper floor, high and piercing, followed by a commotion of footsteps. Poirot set down his tisane with deliberate care, his posture alert. "That, Hastings, is not the sound of joy." They followed Sir Reginald, a robust man with a soldier's bearing, as he bounded up the grand staircase, his face flushed with alarm. The source of the scream was Clara, the young maid, who stood trembling outside the bride's chamber, her apron twisted in her hands. She's dead, sir," Clara stammered, her eyes wide with horror. "Miss Eleanor, she's gone." Sir Reginald pushed past her, rattling the door, which refused to yield. "Locked," he barked. "Where's the key?" Clara fumbled, producing a key from her pocket. "It was inside, sir, on the floor. I saw it through the crack when I looked." The door was opened, revealing a scene of tragic stillness. Eleanor Cresswell lay on the chaise longue, her bridal gown a cascade of white silk, untouched save for a faint crease where her hand rested. Her face, serene in death, bore no mark of struggle, but beside her, on the polished oak floor, lay her veil, its delicate lace torn in jagged strips, as if ripped in a moment of violence. A single champagne flute stood on the vanity, its contents half drunk, the bubbles long since faded. The windows were barred, their latches secure, and the room's only entrance was the door, now unlocked but previously sealed. Poirot stepped forward, his movements precise, his eyes darting over every detail. He knelt by the veil, touching the torn edges with a gloved finger. "Curieux," he murmured. "This tear is not accidental. It has purpose." He rose, examining the champagne glass without touching it, noting a faint residue at its rim. And this glass, perhaps it tells a story of its own. Hastings, hovering at the threshold, looked pale. Good Lord, Poirot, how could this happen? The room was locked, the key inside. No one could have entered. Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing beneath it. The impossible, mon ami, is merely a challenge to the little gray cells. A locked room does not mean an empty one. Sir Reginald, his voice hoarse, demanded, "Who could do this to my Eleanor?" "On her wedding day." Poirot turned, his expression grave but composed. "That, Sir Reginald, is what Hercule Poirot intends to discover. We must preserve this room exactly as it is. No one enters, no one touches anything. And we must summon the doctor, Dr. Merton, I believe, to examine the body and this glass. There is a scent here, faint but unmistakable, that suggests more than champagne." Clara, still trembling, whispered, "I brought the champagne myself, sir, not an hour ago. Miss Eleanor asked for it special." Poirot's eyes fixed on her, sharp but kind. "And you saw no one else, mademoiselle? No one near the room?" Clara shook her head vigorously. "No, sir. The corridor was empty." "Very well," Poirot said, dismissing her gently. He turned to Hastings, his voice low. "The facts, they begin to form a pattern, but it is incomplete. A locked room, a torn veil, a glass of champagne, and a bride who will never see her groom. This, Hastings, is a puzzle most intricate." As the guests below began to whisper of tragedy, Poirot stood motionless, his mind already weaving through the threads of motive and opportunity. The sealed chamber held its secrets, but to Hercule Poirot, no secret was impenetrable. Chapter 2. The Players in the Drama. The library of Ashbourne Hall, with its towering oak shelves and the faint musty scent of aged leather, was a sanctuary of somber quietude, a stark contrast to the chaos that had erupted just hours before. The wedding guests, their festive mood extinguished, had been ushered back to their rooms, or lingered, in hushed clusters in the drawing-room, leaving the library as the stage for Hercule Poirot's first act of inquiry. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn, casting long shadows across the room, where a fire crackled fitfully in the grate, its light flickering over the faces of those summoned to face the great detective's scrutiny. Poirot stood at the center of the room, his small, meticulous figure commanding despite its diminutive stature. His black, patent leather shoes gleamed, his suit was immaculate, and his mustache, that proud emblem of his fastidious nature, was perfectly symmetrical. He held a small notebook in one hand, a silver pencil in the other, poised to capture the nuances of human behavior that so often betrayed the truth. Beside him, Captain Hastings, his loyal friend and chronicler, shifted uncomfortably, his honest face clouded with unease at the tragedy that had unfolded. "A dreadful business, Poirot," he murmured, glancing at the assembled company. "How do you even begin to unravel this?" Poirot's green eyes, sharp as a cat's, flicked toward Hastings. "By observing, mon ami. The truth lies not in what is said, but in what is not said, in the glance, the gesture, the hesitation. We shall meet the players in this drama, and they shall reveal themselves." Sir Reginald Cresswell, the bride's uncle, stood by the fireplace, his broad shoulders hunched as though bearing the weight of the manor itself. His military bearing, honed by years in the Indian Army, was evident in his rigid posture, but his eyes, red-rimmed and hollow, betrayed a grief that cut deeper than decorum could conceal. "This is monstrous," he growled, his voice rough with emotion. Eleanor was the light of this house. Who could commit such an atrocity on her wedding day? Poirot inclined his head, his expression one of sympathetic precision. That, Sir Reginald, is the question we shall answer. But first, I must know the cast of this tragedy. Who was closest to Mademoiselle Eleanor? Sir Reginald gestured to the three figures seated before the fire, their faces illuminated by its uncertain glow. Julian Warrender, the groom, sat in a high-backed chair, his hands clasped tightly, his knuckles white. His handsome features, usually marked by a boyish charm, were drawn and pale, his dark hair disheveled, as though he had run his hands through it repeatedly. Beside him, but at a deliberate distance, sat Miss Beatrice Langley, Eleanor's childhood friend, whose auburn hair was swept into an elegant chignon, though her green eyes were shadowed with something unreadable. Grief, perhaps, or something sharper. Across from them, lounging with an air of forced nonchalance, was Mr. Victor Harwood, a distant cousin of the Cresswells, his lean frame draped in a tailored suit, his smile too quick, too practiced, to be entirely sincere. At the room's edges stood the servants. Clara, the maid who had discovered the body, her face still pale with shock, and Mr. Grayson, the butler, whose impeccable demeanor could not mask the nervous twitch of his fingers. Poirot's gaze lingered on each, as if weighing their souls against the feather of truth. "Let us begin," Poirot said, his voice clear and measured, cutting through the heavy silence. "Monsieur Warrender, you were to marry Mademoiselle Eleanor today. Tell me of your last moments with her." Julian Warrender raised his head, his gray eyes meeting Poirot's with a flicker of anguish. "Last night," he said, his voice low but steady. "We dined together in the conservatory, just the two of us. Eleanor was radiant. She spoke of our future, our plans to travel to Italy after the honeymoon. We laughed, His voice broke, and he pressed a handkerchief to his lips. "I left her at 10 o'clock. She said she wanted to rest, to be fresh for the morning. I kissed her good night, and she locked the door behind me. That was the last I saw of her." Poirot's pencil scratched softly in his notebook. "Locked, you say? You are certain?" Julian nodded. "I heard the key turn. I tried the door this morning, before Clara screamed, and it was still locked. I couldn't get in." "And your feelings for Mademoiselle Eleanor?" Poirot asked, his tone gentle but probing. "They were, shall we say, unwavering?" Julian's eyes flashed with sudden fire. "I loved her with all my heart. She was everything to me." Poirot nodded, his expression inscrutable. "Merci, monsieur. We shall speak again." He turned to Beatrice Langley, who sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, her posture rigid, as if braced for an assault. "Mademoiselle Langley, you were a friend of the bride. Oui? Since childhood, I understand." Beatrice's lips curved in a faint, controlled smile. "Yes, Mr. Poirot. Eleanor and I grew up together. We shared everything, secrets, dreams, laughter." Her voice was smooth, almost too smooth, like polished glass hiding a crack. "I was to be her maid of honor today." "And yet," Poirot said, tilting his head, "there is a shadow in your eyes, mademoiselle, a shadow that speaks of more than grief. You knew Mademoiselle Eleanor well. Did you know of any enemies, any who might wish her harm?" Beatrice's fingers tightened, the knuckles whitening. "Enemies? Eleanor? No, she was loved by everyone. She was perfect." The word seemed to catch in her throat, and she looked away, her gaze fixed on the fire. Poirot's mustache twitched, a subtle sign of his interest. Perfection, mademoiselle, is a rare thing, and often resented. You saw her yesterday, perhaps. You helped with her preparations? I did, Beatrice admitted, her voice softening. We spent the afternoon together, trying on her veil, arranging her flowers. She was so happy. Her eyes flickered, and Poirot noted the briefest pause before she added, I left her around 8, before her dinner with Julian. 8 o'clock, Poirot repeated, his pencil moving again. And you saw nothing unusual? No one lingering near her room? Beatrice shook her head, her auburn curls catching the firelight. Nothing. It was a quiet evening. Poirot dismissed her with a nod, his gaze shifting to Victor Harwood, who had been watching the exchange with a faint smirk, as if amused by the proceedings. Monsieur Harwood, Poirot said, his tone sharpening slightly. You are a cousin of the Cresswells, but not, I think, a close one. What brought you to this wedding? Victor's smirk widened, though his eyes remained wary. Family obligation, Mr. Poirot, and the promise of a good party. Eleanor was a distant cousin, but I liked her well enough. She had a certain sparkle. And where were you last night? Poirot asked, his voice deceptively mild. While Mademoiselle Eleanor dined and prepared for her wedding? Victor leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. I was in the billiard room, playing cards with some of the other guests, Lord Marlowe and young Mr. Pennington. We were there until nearly midnight, weren't we, Grayson? He glanced at the butler, who gave a curt nod. Indeed, sir, Grayson confirmed, his voice as polished as his silver tray. I served drinks to the gentlemen at 11:30. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And you saw nothing of Mademoiselle Eleanor after dinner, Monsieur Harwood? Nothing, Victor said, his tone light but his fingers drumming faintly on the arm of his chair. I'm not one for late-night wanderings. Poirot made a note, then turned to the servants. Mademoiselle Clara, you brought the champagne to Mademoiselle Eleanor's room this morning. Tell me precisely what happened. Clara, her hands twisting in her apron, stepped forward, her voice trembling. It was about 10, sir. Miss Eleanor sent for a glass of champagne, said it would calm her nerves. I poured it from the bottle in the pantry, the one kept special for her, and took it up myself. I knocked, and she opened the door just a crack, took the tray, and closed it again. I heard the lock turn after. And the key? Poirot asked, his eyes fixed on her face. You saw it inside the room? Clara hesitated, her cheeks flushing. I saw it on the floor, sir, when I looked through the crack later, after I found her. I didn't touch it, I swear. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. And you, Monsieur Grayson? You are the guardian of this house's order. Did you see anyone near Mademoiselle Eleanor's room last night or this morning? Grayson, tall and gaunt, stood straighter. No, sir. I was in the servants' hall most of the evening, overseeing preparations for today. This morning, I was in the dining room until Clara's scream brought me upstairs. Poirot closed his notebook with a snap, his gaze sweeping the room. Merci, all of you. You have given me much to consider. But know this. Hercule Poirot does not accept the impossible. A crime has been committed, and the truth, it will be found. As the group dispersed, Sir Reginald lingered, his face etched with pain. Mr. Poirot, you must find who did this. Eleanor was like a daughter to me. Poirot placed a hand on his arm, his voice soft but firm. I shall, Sir Reginald. The little gray cells, they are already at work. Outside the library, Hastings caught up with Poirot, his brow furrowed. "What do you make of it, Poirot? Julian's heartbroken, Beatrice is guarded, and Victor's too slick by half. And the servants, Clara's nervous, but that could just be shock." Poirot paused, adjusting his cuffs with deliberate care. "Each has a story, Hastings, but stories are like tapestries, beautiful on the surface, but the threads beneath may tell a different tale. Julian's love, it is sincere, but love can blind as well as bind. Beatrice's composure hides a storm, I think, and Victor, his charm is a mask, but for what? The servants, too. They know more than they say. The champagne, the key, the veil. These are the keys to the puzzle." They walked toward the staircase, where Dr. Merton, the local physician, was descending, his black bag in hand. "Mr. Poirot," he said, his voice grave, "I've examined the body and the glass. There's no doubt, cyanide in the champagne. Death would have been quick, within minutes, but how it got there, in a locked room—" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "That, doctor, is the heart of the matter. I shall need to examine the room again, and the bottle from which the champagne was poured. And I must know more of these people, their histories, their passions, their secrets." Hastings shook his head. "A locked room, Poirot. It's impossible." "Non, non," Poirot said, his voice almost playful. "The impossible is merely a door that has not yet been opened, and Hercule Poirot, he has the key." As they returned to the tragic chamber, Poirot's mind was already turning, sifting through the words, the glances, the silences. The players in the drama had taken their places, but the script, he knew, was far from complete. The truth lay hidden, but not for long, not with Hercule Poirot on the stage. Chapter 3. The Torn Veil. The late morning light filtered through the heavy drapes of Ashbourne Hall, casting a muted glow over the bridal chamber where Eleanor Cresswell's body still lay, untouched since Dr. Merton's examination. The room, with its delicate wallpaper of forget-me-nots and the faint scent of lavender from Eleanor's perfume, seemed frozen in a moment of eternal preparation, as if the bride might yet rise and don her veil. Hercule Poirot stood at the threshold, his small frame silhouetted against the corridor's dimness, his eyes scanning the scene with the precision of a watchmaker. Captain Hastings hovered behind him, his face a mixture of awe and unease, as though the room itself held a malevolent secret. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice low but clear, "observe the order of this chaos. A locked room, a poisoned glass, a torn veil. These are not accidents, but deliberate strokes on the canvas of crime." Hastings frowned, his hands clasped behind his back. "But Poirot, how could anyone have entered? The key was inside, the windows barred. It's as if a phantom did this." Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his amusement at Hastings' penchant for the dramatic. "A phantom, perhaps, but one with a human heart. Let us examine the evidence, not the ghosts." He stepped forward, his polished shoes silent on the thick Aubusson carpet, and approached the chaise longue where Eleanor lay. Her face, serene in death, bore no trace of the agony cyanide should have wrought, suggesting a swift and merciless end. Poirot's gaze lingered on her hands, folded gently across her chest, the engagement ring, a single sapphire set in gold, gleaming dully. He turned to the veil, which lay crumpled on the floor like a discarded dream, its lace edges jagged and frayed. "This veil," Poirot murmured, kneeling to inspect it. "It speaks to us." He lifted it with gloved hands, holding it to the light. The tear was not a single rip, but a series of deliberate cuts, as if made with a blade or scissors, the pattern irregular yet purposeful. This was no act of passion in the moment of death. It was done with intent, perhaps to suggest a struggle where none occurred. Hastings peered over his shoulder, his brow furrowed. But why tear the veil at all? If the poison was in the champagne, why bother with this? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Précisément, Hastings. The veil is a symbol, perhaps of the bride's purity, her love, or her triumph. To tear it is to strike at something deeper than flesh. It is personal, intimate. The murderer wished to wound as well as to kill. He set the veil aside, marking its position with a small chalk outline, and moved to the vanity where the champagne flute stood, its contents now a faint amber stain. Poirot leaned close, his nose twitching as he inhaled the faint, bitter almond scent that Dr. Merton had identified as cyanide. "The glass," he said, "is our first clue to the method. Clara claims she poured it from a bottle in the pantry, yet the poison was here. We must see this bottle and know its journey." He turned his attention to the lock on the door, a sturdy brass mechanism that showed no signs of force. The key, now in Sir Reginald's possession, was a simple iron affair, unremarkable but singular. According to the butler, Grayson. Poirot crouched, his magnifying glass catching the light as he examined the keyhole. "Regardez, Hastings," he said, pointing to faint scratches around the brass plate. "These marks, they are recent, subtle, but present. A tool, perhaps, or another key." Hastings blinked, leaning closer. "You think someone picked the lock?" Poirot shook his head. "No, not picked. These marks suggest a key, but one used with hesitation or unfamiliarity. The lock was opened, but not by force. We must discover if another key exists." He rose, dusting his gloves with a fastidious gesture, and surveyed the room once more. The windows, barred with wrought iron, were secure, their latches rusted from disuse. The fireplace, cold and empty, offered no hidden passages, and the walls, when tapped, gave only the solid thud of plaster and wood. "No secret doors, no trapdoors," Poirot said, almost to himself. "The solution, it lies in the human element, not the architectural." Hastings, pacing now, gestured to the room. "But Poirot, if the door was locked and the key inside, how could anyone have entered and left without being seen? Clara was in the corridor, wasn't she? And Grayson was about the house." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "The corridor, the servants, the key. These are pieces of the puzzle, but they do not yet fit. We must question further. But first I wish to speak with Clara again. Her story. It is too neat, too simple." They descended to the servants' hall, a narrow stone-walled space below stairs, where Clara sat, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes darting nervously as Poirot approached. The other servants, busy with tasks to keep the manor running despite the tragedy, cast curious glances, but kept their distance. Grayson, overseeing the polishing of silver, nodded stiffly as Poirot entered. "Mademoiselle Clara," Poirot began, his tone gentle but firm. "You are central to this morning's events. Let us revisit your story. You poured the champagne, you say, from a bottle in the pantry. Who instructed you to do so?" Clara's cheeks flushed, and she twisted her apron. "Miss Eleanor, sir. She sent a note through one of the footmen, asking for a glass of champagne to calm her nerves. It's not unusual. She liked a bit of fizz now and then." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "A note, you say? And where is this note now?" Clara faltered, her hands stilling. I don't know, sir. I gave it back to the footman, I think, or perhaps I left it in the pantry." Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings, who raised an eyebrow. "And the bottle," Poirot continued. "It was kept special for Mademoiselle Eleanor? No one else drank from it?" "No, sir," Clara said quickly. "It was her favorite, a gift from Sir Reginald for the wedding, kept in the pantry, locked away." "Locked, you say?" Poirot's voice sharpened. "And who has the key to this pantry?" Clara hesitated, glancing at Grayson, who had paused in his work. "Mr. Grayson keeps the pantry key, sir, but it's hung on a hook in the kitchen when he's not using it. Anyone could have taken it." Grayson stepped forward, his face impassive. "The pantry is secure, Mr. Poirot. I checked it myself last night. The bottle was untouched, sealed with its cork and foil." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And this morning, when Clara poured the champagne, you saw nothing amiss?" "Nothing," Grayson said firmly. "I was in the dining room, preparing for the wedding breakfast." Poirot dismissed Clara with a nod, but his eyes lingered on Grayson. "Monsieur Grayson, you are a man of order, oui? You see much in this house. Did you notice anyone near Mademoiselle Eleanor's room last night, after Monsieur Warrender left her?" Grayson's fingers twitched, a fleeting sign of discomfort. "No, sir. The corridor was quiet. I made my rounds at 11, and all was as it should be." "Merci," Poirot said, his tone dismissing but his eyes alert. As they left the servants' hall, Hastings whispered, "Clara's nervous, but that could be the shock. Grayson's steady as a rock, though. Do you suspect him?" Poirot's lips curved slightly. "I suspect everyone, Hastings, until the little gray cells tell me otherwise. Clara's story has gaps, the note, the pantry key. Grayson's calm is perhaps too perfect, but it is the veil that troubles me most. Its destruction was not necessary for the murder, yet it was done. Why?" They returned to the library where Sir Reginald awaited, his face etched with impatience. "Mr. Poirot, have you found anything? The guests are restless, and the police will arrive soon. We must have answers." Poirot raised a hand, his gesture calming. "Patience, Sir Reginald. The truth, it reveals itself in layers, like an onion. I have requested a search of the manor for any duplicate keys or signs of tampering. Dr. Merton will analyze the champagne bottle further, and I must know more of Mademoiselle Eleanor's life, her friends, her rivals, her secrets." Sir Reginald's eyes darkened. Eleanor had no enemies. She was kind, generous, loved by all. Poirot's smile was gentle but knowing. "No one, Sir Reginald, is loved by all. The human heart is a complex thing, and love often breeds envy. Tell me, was there tension between Mademoiselle Eleanor and Mademoiselle Langley?" Sir Reginald hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Beatrice was her friend, but there was a time, years ago, when both girls fancied Julian. It was a childish rivalry, nothing more. Beatrice seemed content to be Eleanor's maid of honor." "Content," Poirot repeated softly, his pencil tapping his notebook. "A word that hides many truths. And Monsieur Harwood, what is his place in this household?" "A distant cousin," Sir Reginald said, his tone dismissive. "He visits occasionally, always charming but never serious. Eleanor tolerated him, nothing more." Poirot nodded, his mind already turning. "Merci, Sir Reginald. I shall need to speak with the guests again, but first the physical clues must be pursued. The veil, the key, the champagne. They are the threads of this tapestry." As Sir Reginald left, Hastings shook his head. "It's a devil of a puzzle, Poirot. The veil's torn, the champagne's poisoned, and the room's locked tight. Where do you go from here?" Poirot's eyes sparkled with the thrill of the chase. To the heart of the matter, Hastings. The veil tells us of motive, the champagne of method, and the key of opportunity. We shall unravel them all, for Hercule Poirot does not rest until the truth is laid bare. They stepped into the corridor, the manor's silence heavy with secrets. The torn veil, like a spectre, lingered in Poirot's mind, whispering of a crime that was as much about passion as it was about death. Chapter 4. The Groom's Tale. The afternoon sun hung low over Ashbourne Hall, its rays slanting through the tall windows of the study, where Hercule Poirot had chosen to conduct his next inquiry. The room, with its dark mahogany paneling and shelves lined with leather-bound volumes, exuded an air of solemnity, as if the very walls mourned the tragedy that had befallen the house. A portrait of a stern-faced Cresswell ancestor gazed down from above the fireplace, its eyes seeming to follow the movements of the living with silent judgment. Poirot stood by the desk, his small, meticulous figure a study in composure, his hands clasped behind his back, his mustache perfectly aligned. Captain Hastings sat in a leather armchair, his notepad open, though his pen remained idle, his attention fixed on the man before them, Julian Warrender, the bereaved groom. Julian sat hunched in a chair, his tailored morning suit now creased, his dark hair falling untidily across his forehead. His gray eyes, usually bright with charm, were dull with grief, and his hands, clutching a crumpled handkerchief, trembled faintly. The weight of the morning's events seemed to press upon him, aging him beyond his 30 years. Yet there was a steadiness in his posture, a resolve that caught Poirot's sharp eye, as if Julian were bracing himself for a battle he could not yet name. "Monsieur Warrender," Poirot began, his voice smooth and deliberate, like a musician tuning an instrument. "You have suffered a loss most profound. Hercule Poirot offers his condolences, but also his determination to uncover the truth. You will assist me, by recounting the events of last night with the utmost precision." Julian nodded, his throat working as he swallowed. "I'll do my best, Mr. Poirot. Anything to find out who did this to Eleanor." Poirot inclined his head, his green eyes unblinking. "Bon, let us begin with your final moments with Mademoiselle Eleanor. You dined together, you said, in the conservatory. Tell me everything, every word, every gesture, every detail." Julian drew a deep breath, his gaze fixed on a point beyond Poirot, as if conjuring the memory. It was about 8 o'clock. The conservatory was lit with candles. Eleanor loved the way they flickered against the glass walls. "We had a light supper, just the two of us. Cold chicken, asparagus, a bit of wine. She was radiant. Her laughter, it was like music. She talked of our plans, our honeymoon in Venice, the little house we'd buy near the coast. She was so full of life, so certain of our future." His voice cracked, and he pressed the handkerchief to his lips, his eyes glistening. Poirot's expression remained impassive, though his pencil moved swiftly in his notebook. "And her mood, monsieur? Was there any sign of unease, of fear?" Julian shook his head, his brow furrowing. "None. She was happy, truly happy. If anything, she was a bit nervous about the wedding, worried about the flowers being just right, or the guests being comfortable. But that was Eleanor. She cared about everyone." Poirot nodded, his gaze flicking to the handkerchief, which Julian twisted tightly. "And after dinner? You left her at 10, you said. You heard the door lock?" "Yes," Julian said, his voice firm. We walked back to her room together. She wanted to rest, to be fresh for the morning. I kissed her good night at her door, number 12, on the second floor. She went inside, and I heard the key turn in the lock. I waited a moment, just to be sure she was safe. Then I went to my room in the West Wing. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "You waited, monsieur? Why?" Julian flushed, a faint color rising in his pale cheeks. I don't know. I just wanted to know she was all right. It was her last night as Eleanor Cresswell, before she became my wife. I suppose I was reluctant to let her go." "A sentiment most touching," Poirot said, his tone neutral but his eyes probing. "And you saw no one else in the corridor? No servants? No guests?" "No one," Julian said. The house was quiet. Most of the guests were still in the drawing room or had retired early. Poirot made a note, his pencil scratching softly. "And this morning, monsieur, when you tried the door, you found it locked as Clara did?" Julian nodded, his jaw tightening. "I went to her room at 10:30 to see if she needed anything before the ceremony. I knocked, but there was no answer. I tried the handle. Locked. I thought perhaps she was dressing, or with Beatrice, so I waited. Then Clara came, and she screamed." His voice broke, and he looked away, his shoulders shaking. Poirot observed him in silence, his head tilted slightly, as if weighing the sincerity of Julian's grief. "Monsieur Warrender, you loved Mademoiselle Eleanor deeply. Oui? There were no complications in your affection?" Julian's head snapped up, his eyes flashing with sudden anger. "Complications? What are you implying, Mr. Poirot? Eleanor was my world. There was no one else, nothing else." Poirot raised a hand, his gesture calming. "I imply nothing, monsieur. I seek only the truth. Love, it is a powerful force, but it can cast shadows, jealousy, rivalry, secrets. You knew Mademoiselle Langley, I believe, before your engagement to Mademoiselle Eleanor." Julian's flush deepened, and he shifted in his chair. "Beatrice? Yes, I knew her. We all grew up together, Eleanor, Beatrice, and I. There was a time, years ago, when Beatrice and I, well, we were young, and there was a flirtation. But it was nothing serious, nothing lasting. Eleanor was always the one I loved." Poirot's mustache twitched, a subtle sign of his interest. "And Mademoiselle Langley? She accepted this? She bore no resentment?" Julian hesitated, his fingers tightening on the handkerchief. "Beatrice was Eleanor's friend. She was happy for us, or so she said. I never saw anything to suggest otherwise. She was to be maid of honor, after all." "Indeed," Poirot said softly, his pencil pausing. "And yet, the heart is not always so easily reconciled. Tell me, monsieur, did Mademoiselle Eleanor ever speak of fears, of threats, of anyone who might wish her harm?" Julian shook his head, his expression anguished. "Never. Everyone loved Eleanor. She was kind, generous, without malice. I can't imagine who would do this." Poirot closed his notebook with a deliberate snap, his eyes never leaving Julian's face. "Merci, Monsieur Warrender. You have been most helpful. But know this. The truth, it hides in the smallest details, and Hercule Poirot will find it." Julian rose, his movements unsteady, and left the room, his shoulders bowed as if carrying an invisible burden. Hastings, who had been silent throughout, leaned forward, his voice low. "Poor chap, Poirot. He's devastated. You don't suspect him, surely?" Poirot turned, his expression enigmatic. "Suspect, Hastings? I suspect no one and everyone. Monsieur Warrender's grief, it is genuine, but grief can mask other truths. His love for Mademoiselle Eleanor is clear, But love, it can lead to desperation, to secrets. And his hesitation when speaking of Mademoiselle Langley, it is a thread we must follow. Hastings frowned, flipping through his notepad. He seemed straightforward to me. His story matches Clara's about the locked door. And that business with Beatrice, it sounds like old history, nothing more. Poirot smiled, a faint, knowing curve of his lips. History, mon ami, is never truly past. It lingers in the heart, in the glances, in the silences. Monsieur Warrender tells us much, but not all. We must learn more of his relationship with Mademoiselle Langley and of Mademoiselle Eleanor's own heart. Was she truly as universally loved as he claims? They stepped into the corridor, where the manor's hush seemed to deepen, the weight of tragedy settling like dust. Poirot paused by a window, his gaze distant, as if seeing beyond the rolling lawns to the puzzle's core. The groom's tale is but one chapter, Hastings. The veil, the champagne, the key. They wait to tell their stories, and we shall listen. Hastings shook his head, a wry smile tugging at his lips. You make it sound so simple, Poirot. But this locked room, it's a devil of a mystery. Non, non, Poirot replied, his eyes sparkling with the thrill of the chase. It is a challenge, Hastings, and Hercule Poirot does not shrink from challenges. The truth, it is there, waiting for the little gray cells to uncover it. As they moved toward the staircase, the manor's shadows seemed to close in, whispering of secrets yet to be revealed. Julian Warrender's tale had been told, but Poirot knew the drama was far from over. Chapter 5. The Rival's Shadow. The drawing room of Ashbourne Hall, with its high ceilings and ornate plasterwork, was bathed in the soft glow of a late afternoon sun, filtered through tall windows draped in damask. The festive air that had filled the space just hours ago had vanished, replaced by a heavy silence, broken only by the occasional crackle of the fire in the marble hearth. Hercule Poirot stood near a gilt-framed mirror, his reflection showing a man of impeccable precision. His suit pressed, his mustache a perfect curve, his green eyes sharp with purpose. Captain Hastings, ever the faithful shadow, stood by a rosewood table, his hands fidgeting with a silver cigarette case, his honest face clouded with unease at the day's grim turn. Poirot had requested a private audience with Miss Beatrice Langley, the childhood friend of the late Eleanor Cresswell, and, as whispers suggested, a rival for Julian Warrender's affections. The door opened, and Beatrice entered, her auburn hair catching the light like burnished copper, her posture erect, but her movements deliberate, as if each step were a calculated act. She wore a deep green dress that accentuated her pale complexion, but her eyes, rimmed with the faintest trace of red, betrayed a turmoil she sought to conceal. She took a seat across from Poirot, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her gaze meeting his with a mixture of defiance and caution. Mademoiselle Langley, Poirot began, his voice smooth as polished stone. You have known Mademoiselle Eleanor since childhood, oui? A bond most precious, yet one that perhaps has known its strains. Hercule Poirot seeks the truth, and you, I think, hold pieces of it. Beatrice's lips curved in a faint, controlled smile, though her fingers tightened, betraying her composure. I'll help however I can, Mr. Poirot. Eleanor was my dearest friend. Her death, it's unimaginable. Poirot tilted his head, his eyes never leaving her face. Unimaginable, yet real. Let us speak plainly. You were to be her maid of honor, a role of trust and intimacy. Tell me of your time with Mademoiselle Eleanor yesterday. Every detail, if you please. Beatrice's gaze flickered briefly to the fire, as if seeking solace in its glow. Yesterday afternoon, we were together in her room. Eleanor was excited, nervous, the way brides are. We tried on her veil. It was exquisite, French lace, a gift from her aunt in Paris. She stood before the mirror, adjusting it, laughing about how it made her feel like a princess. We talked of old times, of our girlhood in St. Aldwyn's, of the games we played in these very gardens. Her voice softened, a note of nostalgia creeping in, but her eyes remained guarded. Poirot's pencil moved silently in his notebook. And her mood, mademoiselle? Was it only joy, or did you sense any shadow upon her? Beatrice hesitated, her fingers smoothing an invisible crease in her dress. She was happy, Mr. Poirot, truly. If there was anything troubling her, she hid it well. Eleanor was always good at that, keeping her worries to herself. Poirot's mustache twitched, a subtle sign of his interest. And you, mademoiselle? You shared her joy, oui? There was no, how shall I say, envy in your heart? For her marriage to Monsieur Warrender, perhaps? Beatrice's eyes flashed, a spark of anger breaking through her composure. Envy? Is that what you think? Eleanor and I were friends, Mr. Poirot. I wished her every happiness. Julian and I, well, that was years ago, a foolish flirtation when we were barely out of school. I let it go long before he proposed to her. Poirot leaned forward slightly, his voice gentle but probing. Yet the heart, it does not always let go so easily. Monsieur Warrender mentioned this flirtation, and I observe, mademoiselle, that your hands tremble when his name is spoken. There was, perhaps, a moment when you hoped for more? Beatrice's cheeks flushed, and she clasped her hands tighter, as if to still them. You're mistaken, Mr. Poirot. I cared for Julian once, yes, but that was in the past. I was content to see him with Eleanor. She deserved him, and he her. Poirot nodded, his expression inscrutable. Content, you say? A word that covers many truths. Let us turn to the veil, mademoiselle. You saw it yesterday, perfect and whole. When did you last see Mademoiselle Eleanor? Beatrice's gaze dropped to her hands, and she took a moment to answer. After we tried the veil, I helped her arrange her flowers, white roses, her favorite. It was about 7 o'clock when I left her. She wanted to dine alone with Julian, so I went to my room to dress for the evening. I didn't see her after that. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And you saw no one else near her room? No servants? No guests? No one, Beatrice said firmly, though her voice held a faint tremor. The corridor was empty when I left. Poirot made a note, his pencil scratching softly. And this morning, mademoiselle? Where were you when Clara's scream was heard? I was in the garden, Beatrice said, her tone steadier now. I needed air after all the preparations. I heard the scream and ran inside, but by then everyone was rushing to Eleanor's room. Poirot closed his notebook with a deliberate snap, his gaze fixed on Beatrice. Merci, mademoiselle. You have given me much to consider. But know this. The truth, it is like a shadow. It follows closely, even when we turn away. Beatrice rose, her movements graceful but stiff, and left the room without another word. Hastings, who had been silent, leaned forward, his cigarette case forgotten. She's hiding something, Poirot. Did you see how she faltered when you mentioned Julian? And that business about the veil. She was too quick to say it was perfect. Poirot's lips curved in a faint smile. Précisément, Hastings. Mademoiselle Langley is a woman of control, but control, it cracks under pressure. Her affection for Monsieur Warrender, it lingers, though she denies it. And her account of yesterday, it is precise, yet it lacks the warmth of true friendship. There is a distance between her and Mademoiselle Eleanor, a distance that may hold the key to this crime. Hastings frowned, tapping his pen against his notepad. But her story fits with Julian's, more or less. She left Eleanor before the dinner, and no one saw her near the room after that. Could she have slipped in later somehow? Poirot adjusted his cuffs, his movements deliberate. The somehow, Hastings, is the heart of the matter. The locked room, the poisoned champagne, the torn veil, these are not accidents, but a performance. Mademoiselle Langley's role in this performance, it is not yet clear, but her shadow, it is long and dark. They stepped into the corridor, where the manor's hush seemed to deepen, the weight of secrets pressing against the walls. Poirot paused by a portrait of a young Eleanor, her smile bright and unguarded, and his expression softened. Mademoiselle Eleanor, she was loved, but love, it breeds not only devotion, but resentment. We must learn more of Mademoiselle Langley's heart, and of those who moved in her orbit. Hastings shook his head, a wry smile tugging at his lips. You see motives everywhere, Poirot, but how do you piece it together when the room was locked tight? Poirot's eyes sparkled with the thrill of the puzzle. The room, Hastings, is not the mystery. The mystery is the human heart. The veil was torn, the champagne poisoned, the key inside. Yet, someone entered and left. Hercule Poirot will find the how and the why, for no shadow escapes the light of the little gray cells. As they moved toward the staircase, the manor's silence seemed to whisper of hidden truths, and Poirot's mind, ever active, began to weave the threads of suspicion into a pattern only he could yet see. Chapter 6. The Guest's Disquiet. The billiard room of Ashbourne Hall, with its green baize table and polished mahogany cues, was a haven of masculine retreat, its walls adorned with hunting trophies and the faint aroma of cigar smoke lingering in the air. The late afternoon light, now tinged with the golden hue of approaching dusk, slanted through the mullioned windows, casting long shadows across the room. Hercule Poirot stood by the billiard table, his small, fastidious figure a stark contrast to the room's rugged charm, his hands clasped behind his back, his mustache a perfect crescent of precision. Captain Hastings leaned against the door-frame, his arms crossed, his honest face marked by a frown, as he watched Poirot's meticulous movements. They had come to interview Mr. Victor Harwood, the distant cousin whose easy charm and restless energy had already piqued Poirot's interest. Victor entered, his lean frame clad in a tailored gray suit, his smile quick and disarming, though his dark eyes held a wary glint, like those of a fox scenting danger. He tossed his cigarette case onto the table with a casual flick, then lounged in a leather chair, one leg crossed over the other, as if to proclaim his ease in the face of tragedy. Monsieur Harwood, Poirot began, his voice smooth and measured, like a conductor preparing an orchestra. You are a guest at this wedding, a cousin of the Cresswells, yet not, I think, a frequent visitor to Ashbourne Hall. Hercule Poirot seeks to understand your place in this drama. You will tell me, if you please, of your movements last night and this morning. Victor's smile widened, though it did not reach his eyes. Straight to the point, Mr. Poirot. I like that. I'm just a bystander here, a bit of family decoration for the big day. Last night? I was right here, in this room, playing cards with Lord Marlowe and young Pennington. We had a fine time. Whiskey, laughter, a few pounds changing hands. Didn't wrap up until nearly midnight. Poirot's green eyes, sharp as cut glass, fixed on Victor. And this can be confirmed, oui? Lord Marlowe and Monsieur Pennington, they will vouch for you? Of course, Victor said, his tone light, but his fingers drumming faintly on the arm of his chair. Grayson brought us drinks around 11:30, didn't he? He'll tell you I was here, glued to the table. Poirot made a note in his small black notebook, his pencil moving with deliberate care. And after midnight, monsieur, where did you go? Victor shrugged, his smile unwavering. To bed, Mr. Poirot. My room's in the east wing, 3rd floor. I slept like a log until the commotion this morning woke me. Clara's scream, I suppose. I came down to see what was what, but by then the whole house was in an uproar. Poirot tilted his head, his expression unreadable. And Mademoiselle Eleanor, you knew her well? You spoke of her spark restarts. She had a spark, yes, Victor said, his voice softening slightly. A lovely girl, full of life. We weren't close, distant cousins, you know, but I liked her. Everyone did. Poirot's mustache twitched, a subtle sign of his skepticism. Everyone, monsieur? A dangerous word, for no one is loved by all. Tell me, what was your impression of her engagement to Monsieur Warrender? Victor's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, and he reached for his cigarette case, tapping it absently. Julian's a lucky man. Or was, I suppose. Eleanor was a catch, no question. Good family, good heart, good looks. They seemed happy enough. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And yet, you hesitate, monsieur. There is something you do not say. Perhaps you observed tensions, rivalries within this happy circle. Victor laughed, a short, sharp sound that held little mirth. You're fishing, Mr. Poirot. I'm just a guest, not a gossip. If there were tensions, I didn't see them. Eleanor and Julian were the golden couple, and Beatrice, well, she was the loyal friend, wasn't she? Playing her part as maid of honor. Poirot's pencil paused, and he leaned forward slightly, his voice low and probing. Mademoiselle Langley, yes. You know her well, perhaps? You observed her with Mademoiselle Eleanor, with Monsieur Warrender? Victor's fingers stilled on the cigarette case, and he met Poirot's gaze with a hint of defiance. Beatrice? She's a firebrand, always has been. Known her since we were kids, running around these grounds. She and Eleanor were thick as thieves, though I'd wager Beatrice wasn't thrilled to play second fiddle at the wedding. But that's just human nature, isn't it? Poirot's smile was faint, almost imperceptible. Human nature, monsieur, is the root of all crime. And the champagne, the glass that brought death to Mademoiselle Eleanor, did you see it perhaps when it was brought to her room? Victor shook his head, his expression smooth once more. Not a chance. I was here, as I said, playing cards. Clara handled all that, didn't she? Ask her, or Grayson. They're the ones scurrying about with trays. Poirot's gaze lingered on Victor's cuff, where a faint stain, dark, almost black, caught the light. Your cuff, monsieur, he said, his tone deceptively mild. It bears a mark. Ink, perhaps, or something else? Victor glanced down, his smile tightening, and he brushed at the stain with a casual gesture. Ink, probably. I was writing letters yesterday, family business, you know. Clumsy of me. Poirot made a note, his pencil scratching softly. Letters, oui, a most interesting occupation. You will permit me to see these letters, perhaps? Victor's eyes flickered, but his smile held. "Private matters, Mr. Poirot. Nothing to do with this tragedy, but if you insist, I'll see if I can find them." Poirot nodded, his expression serene, but his mind alert. "Merci, Monsieur Harwood. You have been most cooperative. But know this, the truth, it is like a shadow. It cannot be hidden forever." Victor rose, his movements fluid, but his smile strained, and left the room with a nod. Hastings, who had been silent, stepped forward, his brow furrowed. "He's slippery, Poirot, all charm and no substance. That stain on his cuff, ink, my foot. Could it be something else?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with the thrill of the puzzle. "Précisément, Hastings. The stain, it is a clue, though what it means, we do not yet know. Monsieur Harwood's alibi, it is too perfect, too rehearsed. Lord Marlowe and Monsieur Pennington, they confirm his presence, but cards, they are played with hands, not eyes. He could have slipped away, perhaps unnoticed." Hastings shook his head, his voice low. "But the locked room, Poirot, even if he did slip away, how could he get in and out without the key? And why would he want Eleanor dead? He's just a cousin, not even close." Poirot adjusted his cuffs, his movements deliberate. "Motive, Hastings, is not always in the bloodline. It is in the heart, in envy, in greed, in secrets. Monsieur Harwood's charm, it is a mask, and behind it I sense disquiet. His connection to Mademoiselle Langley, it is worth exploring, for where there is rivalry, there is often complicity." They stepped into the corridor, where the manor's silence seemed to pulse with hidden truths. Poirot paused by a window, his gaze fixed on the gardens below, where the roses, Eleanor's favorites, stood in mournful splendor. The guest, Hastings, he is not merely a bystander. Monsieur Harwood knows more than he says, and his disquiet, it betrays him. The stain, the alibi, the charm, these are threads in the tapestry, and we shall weave them together. Hastings sighed, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "You make it sound like a game, Poirot, but it's a devil of a mess. A locked room, a poisoned glass, a torn veil. How do you fit it all together?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic, his eyes alight with the challenge. "With method, mon ami. The little gray cells, they see what the eyes do not. The guest's disquiet, it is but one piece of the puzzle, but it is a piece that will lead us to the truth. Hercule Poirot does not falter, not when justice is at stake." As they moved toward the staircase, the manor's shadows seemed to whisper of secrets yet to be uncovered, and Poirot's mind, ever vigilant, began to trace the outlines of a crime that was as intricate as it was cruel. Chapter 7. The Hidden Key. The twilight had settled over Ashbourne Hall, cloaking the manor in a somber veil of shadows that mirrored the tragedy within. The grand staircase, its polished oak banisters gleaming faintly under the chandelier's muted glow, led Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings to the upper corridors, where the air was thick with the scent of wax polish and unspoken secrets. Poirot's small, meticulous figure moved with purpose, his patent leather shoes silent on the thick runner, his green eyes alight with the relentless pursuit of truth. Hastings followed, his stride less certain, his honest face etched with the strain of the day's grim discoveries. They had returned to the bridal chamber, now a shrine to Eleanor Cresswell's untimely death, to pursue a thread that had snagged in Poirot's mind, the key to the locked room. The door, still ajar from earlier inspections, stood as a silent sentinel, its brass lock gleaming with an almost mocking defiance. Poirot paused at the threshold, his hands clasped behind his back, his mustache a perfect arc of determination. "Mon ami," he said, his voice low and measured. "The key is the heart of this mystery. A locked room, a single key found inside, yet a murder committed. The impossible, it taunts us, but Hercule Poirot does not bow to the impossible." Hastings, rubbing his chin, glanced at the lock. "It's a sturdy thing, Poirot. No signs of tampering, at least not to my eye. And Clara found the key on the floor, didn't she? How could anyone else have used it?" Poirot's eyes twinkled with a hint of mischief. "The eye, Hastings, it sees only the surface, the little gray cells. They delve deeper. Come, let us examine this lock once more." He knelt, his magnifying glass catching the fading light as he studied the brass keyhole. The faint scratches he had noted earlier were still there, delicate as spider webs, but unmistakable. "Regardez," he said, pointing with a gloved finger. "These marks, they are not the work of age or wear. They are fresh, made by a key, perhaps, but one wielded with uncertainty, or secrecy." Hastings leaned closer, squinting. "You think someone had a duplicate key? But Grayson said there was only one, and it was inside the room." Poirot rose, dusting his gloves with a fastidious gesture. "Grayson says many things, mon ami, and all are true, until they are not. We must test this truth. Let us seek him out, and also the history of this key." They descended to the servants' hall, where the butler, Mr. Grayson, was overseeing the preparation of a subdued supper for the household. His tall, gaunt figure moved with the precision of long habit, his face a mask of professional calm, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease as Poirot approached. "Monsieur Grayson," Poirot began, his tone courteous but firm, "you are the guardian of Ashbourne Hall's order, oui? The keys, they are your domain. Tell me of the key to Mademoiselle Eleanor's room. You said it was the only one?" Grayson nodded, his hands clasped before him. "Yes, sir. The lock is old, from when the manor was built. Each room on the second floor has a single key, kept by the occupant or, in some cases, in my charge. Miss Eleanor's was given to her when she arrived last week, and I saw no other." Poirot's gaze was unyielding, like a hawk's. "And yet, monsieur, you mentioned a spare key, lost some weeks ago. This is correct?" Grayson's fingers twitched, a fleeting sign of discomfort. "Yes, sir. About a month ago, I noticed the spare for room 12 was missing from the key cupboard in my office. I assumed it was misplaced during the spring cleaning. Things do get shuffled about. I reported it to Sir Reginald, but as no one used that room regularly, it wasn't a pressing matter." Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his interest. "Misplaced, you say? A curious word, monsieur. Keys do not walk. Away on their own. Who had access to this cupboard?" Grayson hesitated, his eyes darting to the side. "The cupboard is kept locked, sir, but the key hangs in the kitchen, as is custom. Any of the staff could have taken it, I suppose, though I trust them all. And, well, guests sometimes wander where they shouldn't." Poirot made a note, his pencil scratching softly. "And you, Monsieur Grayson, you made your rounds last night. Did you check the lock of Mademoiselle Eleanor's room?" "Yes, sir," Grayson said, his voice steady but his posture stiffening. "At 11, as always. The door was closed and I heard no sound from within. All seemed in order." Poirot nodded, his expression serene but his mind racing. "Merci, monsieur. You will inform me if you recall anything further about this lost key, oui?" Grayson bowed slightly and returned to his duties, but Poirot's gaze lingered, as if peeling back the layers of the butler's calm. "He knows more than he says, Hastings," Poirot murmured as they left the servants' hall. "The lost key. It is not an accident but a clue. Someone took it, and someone used it." Hastings frowned, his hands in his pockets. "But who? Poirot? The staff? A guest? And how did they get the key back inside the room after the murder?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "That, mon ami, is the artistry of the crime. The key inside suggests an impossibility, but impossibilities are merely illusions. We must search the manor for this spare key, or for evidence of its use." They returned to the second floor, where Poirot had requested a thorough search of the manor's nooks and crannies. 2 footmen, under Sir Reginald's direction, were already combing the guest rooms and storage areas, but their efforts had yielded nothing. No hidden passages, no secret compartments, no duplicate key. Poirot, undeterred, directed his attention to the corridor outside Eleanor's room, a long, carpeted passage lined with portraits and occasional tables. He paused by a small table near the door, its surface adorned with a vase of wilting roses. Bending low, he examined the floor beneath, his magnifying glass sweeping over the carpet. "Aha," he said softly, retrieving a tiny sliver of metal, no larger than a pinhead, glinting in the weave. "What have we here?" Hastings peered over his shoulder, his eyes widening. "Is that part of a key, Poirot?" "Perhaps," Poirot said, slipping the fragment into a small envelope. "Or perhaps a tool used to manipulate a lock. It is too small to be certain, but it is a whisper of the truth. We shall have it examined." As they continued down the corridor, Poirot's thoughts turned to the servants' backgrounds, which Sir Reginald had promised to provide. In the library, where the fire had burned low, Sir Reginald awaited, a sheaf of papers in hand. "Here's what you asked for, Mr. Poirot," he said, his voice heavy with fatigue. "The staff records, such as they are. Most have been with us for years, loyal to a fault." Poirot scanned the documents, his eyes narrowing as he read. "Interessant," he murmured. "Mademoiselle Clara. She once served in the household of Mademoiselle Langley's family before coming to Ashbourne Hall 2 years ago. This connection, it was not mentioned." Sir Reginald frowned, rubbing his temples. "Clara? She's a good girl, quiet, efficient. I didn't know about the Langley connection, but it's a small county. Servants often move between houses." Poirot's pencil tapped his notebook. "And Monsieur Grayson, he has been with you how long?" 15 years, Sir Reginald said. "He came to us from a house in London, highly recommended. He's the soul of discretion, though I've noticed he's taken to lingering near Eleanor's room lately. I thought it was just his diligence." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Diligence or curiosity? We shall see." "Merci, Sir Reginald. This information, it is most illuminating." As Sir Reginald left, Hastings shook his head. "Clara and Beatrice, linked? That's a coincidence, Poirot. And Grayson's lingering. Could he be involved?" Poirot's smile was faint but knowing. "Coincidences, Hastings, are the breadcrumbs of crime. Clara's past with the Langleys, Grayson's watchful habits, these are threads in the tapestry. The hidden key, it is not just a piece of metal but a symbol of opportunity. Someone used it. Someone placed the original key inside, and someone tore the veil to mask their intent." Hastings sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's a labyrinth, Poirot. The key, the poison, the veil. How do you make sense of it?" Poirot's eyes sparkled with the thrill of the chase. "With method, mon ami. The little gray cells, they see the pattern where others see chaos. The hidden key, it unlocks not just a door, but a motive. We are closer, Hastings, to the truth that hides in the shadows of Ashbourne Hall. As they stepped into the corridor, the manor's silence seemed to pulse with secrets, and Poirot's mind, ever vigilant, began to trace the path to a truth that was as elusive as it was inevitable. Chapter 8. The Motive Unraveled. The grand salon of Ashbourne Hall, with its soaring ceilings and crystal chandelier, had been transformed from a stage for celebration into a somber arena of revelation. The evening light, now a deep amber, filtered through the tall windows, casting a warm but melancholy glow over the gathered company. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of the room, his small, impeccable figure commanding attention despite the grandeur around him. His black suit was pristine, his mustache a perfect crescent, and his green eyes gleamed with the quiet certainty of a man who had unraveled a knot of human deceit. Captain Hastings stood to his side, his notepad forgotten in his hand, his face a mixture of anticipation and apprehension as he watched Poirot prepare to unveil the truth. The suspects had been summoned once more. Julian Warrender, his face pale and drawn, sat with his hands clasped tightly. Beatrice Langley, her auburn hair catching the light, maintained a rigid composure, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. Victor Harwood, his charm dimmed, lounged with a forced nonchalance, his fingers tapping restlessly. Clara, the maid, stood near the door, her apron twisted in her hands, and Grayson, the butler, maintained his stoic demeanor, though his gaze darted toward Beatrice. Sir Reginald Cresswell, his military bearing softened by grief, stood by the fireplace, his eyes fixed on Poirot with desperate hope. Poirot held up the torn veil, its delicate lace dangling like a specter of the tragedy. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and resonant, cutting through the heavy silence. "We are gathered to confront a crime most heinous, the murder of Mademoiselle Eleanor Cresswell, struck down in the bloom of her happiness. This veil, torn and discarded, is not merely a piece of lace, but a symbol of love betrayed, of jealousy unleashed, of a heart consumed by envy." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle, his eyes sweeping the room, noting every reaction. Julian's tightened jaw, Beatrice's sudden intake of breath, Victor's fleeting smirk, Clara's nervous glance, Grayson's subtle shift in posture. "The facts, they are these," Poirot continued, pacing slowly. "A locked room, a glass of champagne laced with cyanide, a key found inside, and this veil, torn with purpose. The murderer, they wished to create an illusion of impossibility, but Hercule Poirot sees through illusions." Hastings leaned closer, whispering, "You've got it, haven't you, Poirot?" "The whole thing?" Poirot's smile was faint but confident. "Précisément, mon ami, the little gray cells, they have worked tirelessly. Now listen, and the truth shall be revealed." He turned to the group, holding the veil higher. "Let us begin with the method. The champagne, it was poisoned with cyanide, a swift and silent killer. Clara, you brought the glass to Mademoiselle Eleanor's room. Oui? You poured it from a bottle in the pantry, a bottle reserved for her. Yet the poison was not in the bottle, but in the glass itself, administered by one who knew it would reach her lips." Clara gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "I didn't, sir. I swear, I only poured the champagne." Poirot raised a hand, his gesture calming. "Patience, mademoiselle. You are not accused, but you are a thread in this tapestry. The key, it is the next clue." The door was locked, the key inside, yet scratches on the lock suggest another key. A spare, reported lost but never found. This key, it allowed the murderer to enter, to poison, to tear the veil, and to leave, placing the original key inside to create the illusion of a sealed chamber. Sir Reginald's voice was hoarse. "But who, Mr. Poirot? Who could do this to my Eleanor?" Poirot's eyes softened, but his voice remained firm. "The who, Sir Reginald, is tied to the why. The veil, it was not torn in a struggle, but with intent, a personal act of rage. It was a message directed at Mademoiselle Eleanor's happiness, her love, her triumph. This brings us to motive and to Mademoiselle Beatrice Langley." Beatrice's head snapped up, her eyes blazing. "Me? How dare you, Mr. Poirot? Eleanor was my friend." Poirot's gaze was unyielding, like a blade honed to precision. "Your friend, oui, but also your rival. You loved Monsieur Warrender, did you not? Years ago you hoped to win his heart, but he chose Mademoiselle Eleanor. This choice, it festered, though you hid it behind smiles and friendship. You were her maid of honor, close to her preparations, close to her room. And you knew of Clara, who once served your family, a loyal soul who might unwittingly aid you." Beatrice's composure cracked, her hands trembling. "That's absurd. I cared for Eleanor. I would never—" Poirot raised the veil, his voice cutting through her protest. "This veil, mademoiselle, you saw it yesterday, perfect and whole. You helped Mademoiselle Eleanor try it on, you said. But you returned later, did you not? With the spare key, stolen from Grayson's cupboard weeks ago, when you learned of Eleanor's engagement. You entered her room, poisoned the champagne glass left on the tray, and tore the veil in a moment of bitter rage, a symbol of the love you could not claim." Julian rose, his face ashen. "Beatrice, no, tell him it's not true." Beatrice's eyes filled with tears, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean to kill her. I only wanted to make her ill, to delay the wedding. The cyanide, it was meant for a garden pest. I got it from a chemist. I thought a small dose would sicken her, give me time to make Julian see me again. But it was too strong, and she collapsed into sobs, her hands covering her face. Poirot's expression was grave, his voice soft but unrelenting. "Jealousy, mademoiselle, is a poison more deadly than cyanide. You used Clara's loyalty, knowing she would deliver the tray without question. You tore the veil to mask your act as one of violence, not calculation, but the little gray cells. They see the truth." Victor Harwood, his smirk gone, leaned forward. "And me, Poirot? You've been eyeing my cuff all day. What's my part in this?" Poirot turned, his eyes narrowing. "You, Monsieur Harwood, suspected Mademoiselle Langley's feelings. The stain on your cuff, it was not ink, but a trace of cyanide. From when you handled the vial, perhaps to confirm your suspicions. You chose silence, hoping to use her guilt to your advantage, perhaps to secure a favor from the Langleys. But silence? It is complicity." Victor's face paled, but he said nothing, his gaze dropping to the floor. Grayson, stepping forward, spoke quietly. "I should have watched the keys more closely, sir. If I'd known—" Poirot shook his head. "You could not know, Monsieur Grayson. The fault lies with the heart that chose to act." Sir Reginald, his voice trembling, approached Poirot. "You've done it, Mr. Poirot. You've found her killer. But at what cost to this house?" Poirot's eyes softened, his tone gentle. "The cost of truth, Sir Reginald, is always heavy, but it is necessary. Mademoiselle Eleanor rests now, and justice will follow." As the local magistrate was summoned and Beatrice was led away, still weeping, the salon fell silent, the weight of revelation settling over the room like dust. Hastings, his voice low, said, "You saw it all, Poirot. The veil, the key, the jealousy. How did you know?" Poirot's smile was faint, his eyes distant. "The little gray cells, mon ami, they see the patterns of the heart, love, envy, betrayal. The veil was the key, not to the room, but to the soul of the crime." As the chandelier's light flickered, Poirot turned to the window, the twilight beyond a mirror to the shadows he had dispelled. The motive was unraveled, but the echoes of the tragedy would linger in Ashbourne Hall. Chapter 9. The Confession. The library of Ashbourne Hall, its oak shelves heavy with the weight of centuries-old tomes, was cloaked in the hush of evening, the only sound the soft crackle of the fire in the grate. The room, with its deep burgundy drapes and the faint scent of leather and wood smoke, seemed to hold its breath, as if mourning the tragedy that had shattered the manor's festive spirit. Hercule Poirot stood by a tall window, his small, meticulous figure silhouetted against the twilight beyond, his hands clasped behind his back, his mustache a perfect arc of resolve. Captain Hastings sat in a high-backed chair, his notepad open but untouched, his honest face reflecting a mixture of awe and sorrow at the revelations that had just unfolded in the grand salon. The local magistrate, Mr. Haverford, a stern man with a gray mustache and a demeanor as unyielding as the law he served, had arrived promptly after Poirot's summons. He stood now at the center of the library, his notebook mirroring Poirot's own, though his scribbles were hasty compared to the detective's precise script. Beatrice Langley, her auburn hair loosened from its chignon, sat before him, her hands trembling in her lap, her green eyes glistening with tears that she no longer tried to hide. Julian Warrender, his face a mask of anguish, stood by the fireplace, his hands clenched into fists, as if struggling to contain his grief and rage. Sir Reginald Cresswell, his military bearing softened by devastation, hovered near the door, his eyes fixed on Beatrice with a mixture of disbelief and pity. Clara and Grayson, the servants, stood at the room's edges, their presence almost spectral, their faces pale with the weight of the truth. Poirot turned from the window, his voice calm but resonant, cutting through the heavy silence. "Mesdames et messieurs, we have reached the moment of truth, where the shadows of deceit are banished by the light of confession. Mademoiselle Langley, you have admitted your act, but Hercule Poirot requires the full account. For justice, it demands clarity." Beatrice's voice was barely a whisper, choked with sobs. "I've told you, Mr. Poirot. I didn't mean to kill her. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake." Poirot's eyes, sharp as a falcon's, fixed on her. "A mistake, mademoiselle?" "No, the act was deliberate, though the outcome, perhaps, was not what you intended. Speak now, and tell us all. How did you come to this crime, and why?" Beatrice drew a shuddering breath, her hands twisting the fabric of her dress. "It began months ago, when Julian and Eleanor announced their engagement. I tried to be happy for them. Eleanor was my friend, my oldest friend. And Julian, well, I'd loved him once, years ago, when we were young. I thought I'd let him go. But seeing them together, so perfect, so in love, it hurt, Mr. Poirot. It hurt more than I could bear." She paused, her eyes distant, as if reliving the pain. "I told myself I'd moved on, that I could be her maid of honor, smile through their wedding. But every time I saw them together, it was like a knife. Eleanor had everything, Julian's love, this beautiful life ahead of her, and I had nothing but memories. Poirot nodded, his expression grave but attentive. And so, mademoiselle, you devised a plan. The spare key, how did you come by it? Beatrice's voice trembled, but she continued. I overheard Grayson mention the missing key a month ago during a visit to the manor. He was scolding a footman about the key cupboard being left unlocked. I saw my chance. I took the spare key to Eleanor's room from the cupboard when no one was looking. I didn't know why I did it, not then. It was just an impulse, a way to feel in control. Poirot's pencil scratched softly in his notebook. And the cyanide, mademoiselle? A poison most deadly. How did you obtain it? Beatrice's hands shook violently, and she clasped them together to still them. My family's estate. We had trouble with pests in the greenhouse last summer. I went to the chemist in Cheltenham and bought cyanide, saying it was for the garden. It was easy. Too easy. I kept it in my room, hidden in a jewelry box, telling myself I'd never use it. But when the wedding drew closer, and I saw Eleanor's joy, I couldn't stop myself. Julian made a strangled sound, stepping forward, his voice raw. Beatrice, how could you? Eleanor trusted you. Beatrice's eyes filled with tears, and she looked at him, pleading. I didn't want her dead, Julian. I only wanted to make her ill, to delay the wedding. I thought if I had time, I could make you see me again, remember what we had. I put a small amount in the champagne glass, just a pinch, before Clara took the tray up. I used the spare key to slip into Eleanor's room while she was dining with you, and I left the glass on her vanity. I thought it would make her sick, nothing more. Poirot's voice was soft but unrelenting. And the veil, mademoiselle? Why did you tear it? Beatrice's sobs grew louder, her voice breaking. It was her happiness, staring at me. That veil, it was her crown, her triumph. I saw it on the chair and I couldn't bear it. I took my scissors, the ones I used for embroidery, and I cut it over and over until it was ruined. It was foolish, I know, but I was so angry, so lost. Clara, standing by the door, gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Miss Beatrice, I didn't know. I thought the tray was safe. I'd never have taken it if I'd known. Poirot turned to her, his tone gentle. You are not to blame, mademoiselle. You were a tool in a scheme you could not see. But tell me, the note you mentioned, the one from Mademoiselle Eleanor requesting the champagne, did you see who delivered it? Clara shook her head, her eyes wide. It was one of the footmen, sir, but I didn't see which. It was just a slip of paper in her handwriting, or so I thought. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A forgery, perhaps, to ensure the champagne reached its target. Mademoiselle Langley, you wrote this note, oui? Beatrice nodded, her head bowed. Yes, I copied Eleanor's hand. It wasn't hard. We'd written letters to each other for years. I knew her script as well as my own. Mr. Haverford, his face stern, stepped forward, his notebook snapping shut. Miss Langley, you've confessed to murder, however unintended. You'll come with me to the station, where a formal statement will be taken. Beatrice rose, her movements unsteady, her face pale but resigned. I'm sorry, Julian, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Julian turned away, his shoulders shaking, unable to meet her gaze. Sir Reginald, his voice hoarse, approached Poirot. You've done what you promised, Mr. Poirot. You've found her killer, but God help us, what a cost. Poirot's expression was somber, his voice low. The cost of truth, Sir Reginald, is always great, but it is the price of justice. Mademoiselle Eleanor's memory, it will be honored by this reckoning. As Beatrice was led away, the library fell silent, the fire's crackle the only sound. Hastings, his voice hushed, said, "You saw it all, Poirot? The key, the veil, the jealousy. How did you piece it together so quickly?" Poirot's eyes were distant, his tone reflective. "The little gray cells, mon ami, they see what the heart conceals. The torn veil, it was not a random act but a cry of envy. The key, it was the means, and the champagne, the method. Mademoiselle Langley's confession, it completes the puzzle, though it brings no joy." Grayson, still standing by the door, spoke quietly. "If I'd guarded the keys better, sir, perhaps—" Poirot raised a hand, his gesture kind but firm. "Non, Monsieur Grayson. The fault lies with the one who chose to act. You could not foresee the darkness in another's heart." As the room emptied, Poirot lingered, his gaze fixed on the fire, its flames dancing like the truths he had uncovered. The confession had been made, but the wounds of Ashbourne Hall would not soon heal. Chapter 10. The Closing of the Case. The rose garden of Ashbourne Hall, bathed in the soft light of a late summer evening, stood in mournful contrast to the tragedy that had unfolded within the manor's walls. The blooms, meticulously tended, bowed their heads as if in reverence for Eleanor Cresswell, their delicate petals catching the last rays of the setting sun. Hercule Poirot stood alone among them, his small, impeccable figure a study in quiet contemplation, his black suit absorbing the twilight's glow, his mustache a perfect crescent of resolve. Captain Hastings, ever his loyal companion, lingered a few paces behind, his hands in his pockets, his honest face marked by the weight of the day's revelations. The manor behind them was silent, its festive banners now lowered, its windows dark save for the occasional flicker of candlelight. The guests, their gaiety extinguished, had begun to depart, their whispers of shock and sorrow fading into the dusk. Beatrice Langley had been taken to the local police station by Mr. Haverford, her confession ringing in the ears of those who had heard it. Julian Warrender, broken by grief and betrayal, had retreated to his room, while Sir Reginald Cresswell, his strength sapped, had sought solace in the chapel. The servants, Clara and Grayson among them, moved through their duties with mechanical precision, as if the manor itself were in mourning. Poirot bent to examine a white rose, its petals unmarred by the day's turmoil, and spoke softly, almost to himself. "Love, Hastings, it is the most beautiful of human passions, yet also the most dangerous. It builds, and it destroys. Mademoiselle Eleanor, she was its victim, and Mademoiselle Langley, its prisoner." Hastings stepped closer, his voice low. "You saw it all, Poirot. From the moment we entered that locked room, you knew it was more than it seemed. The veil, the key, the champagne. How do you do it? How do you see what the rest of us miss?" Poirot's eyes twinkled, though his smile was tinged with melancholy. "The little gray cells, mon ami. They see the order in chaos, the pattern in the shadows. The torn veil, it was not a random act, but a cry of the heart. Jealousy, dressed in lace. The key, it was the silent accomplice, stolen and used to weave an illusion of impossibility. The champagne, it carried the poison, but it was the motive that carried the crime." Hastings shook his head, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "You make it sound so simple, Poirot, but that locked room, it was a devil of a puzzle. I thought we'd never crack it." Poirot turned, his gaze sweeping the garden, its beauty a stark contrast to the ugliness he had uncovered. "The room, Hastings, was not the puzzle. The puzzle was the human heart, its desires, its wounds, its secrets. Mademoiselle Langley loved Monsieur Warrender, but her love turned to envy, and envy to a fatal act. She used Clara's loyalty, the stolen key, the forged note, all to delay a wedding she could not bear to witness. But the heart, it betrays itself, and the little gray cells, they listen. They walked slowly along the gravel path, the crunch of their footsteps, the only sound in the still evening. Hastings glanced at Poirot, his expression thoughtful. "What about Victor Harwood? You said he suspected Beatrice, but he kept quiet. Why?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his lingering curiosity. "Monsieur Harwood, he is a man of opportunity. The stain on his cuff, cyanide, not ink, suggested he handled the poison, perhaps discovering Beatrice's plan. He chose silence, hoping to gain some advantage, perhaps over the Langley family. His complicity, it is a lesser crime, but a crime nonetheless. He has left the manor, disgraced, and his conscience, it will judge him." Hastings nodded, his brow furrowing. "And Clara? Poor girl, she was just a pawn, wasn't she?" "Oui," Poirot said, his voice softening. "Mademoiselle Clara was innocent, a tool used by a cunning hand. Her loyalty to Mademoiselle Langley from their shared past made her vulnerable. She will carry the guilt of delivering that fatal glass, but she is not to blame." They paused by a stone bench where Poirot sat, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "This case, Hastings, it reminds us of the fragility of human bonds. Love, it can lift us to the heavens or cast us into the abyss. Mademoiselle Eleanor, she deserved her happiness, and it was stolen by a heart too weak to let go." Sir Reginald emerged from the manor, his steps heavy, his face etched with sorrow. He approached Poirot, his voice rough but sincere. "Mr. Poirot, I cannot thank you enough. You've brought us the truth, though it's a bitter one. Eleanor's memory will be honored, and we'll try to heal somehow." Poirot rose, his expression grave but kind. "Sir Reginald, the truth, it is a balm, though it stings. Ashbourne Hall will endure, and Mademoiselle Eleanor's light, it will linger in those who loved her." Sir Reginald nodded, his eyes glistening, and returned to the manor, leaving Poirot and Hastings alone once more. Hastings sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's over then, but it doesn't feel like a victory, Poirot." "No," Poirot agreed, his voice soft. "Justice is not always a triumph, but a necessity. We have done what must be done, and now we move forward." They began to walk toward the manor's entrance, where their bags awaited, packed for their departure. Poirot paused, glancing back at the rose garden. "And now, mon ami, I crave a tisane, and perhaps a puzzle less tragic, a game of chess, or a mystery of the mind, not the heart." Hastings chuckled, the sound a small spark of lightness in the gloom. "You're incorrigible, Poirot. After all this, you're thinking of tea and games?" Poirot's smile was faint but genuine. "Non, Hastings. I am Hercule Poirot, and I seek order, even in the chaos of human folly. Come, we have done our work here." As they stepped into the manor, the twilight deepened, the roses standing sentinel over a house that would never forget its lost bride. The case was closed, but its echoes would linger, a testament to the power of love and the devastation of its darker twin.